And we're going live. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining. Just give it a moment and let everybody get in. Welcome, everyone. We're just giving it a moment and letting everybody get into the webinar. Okay, let's get started. So welcome, everyone, and thank you for taking the time to join us on our first Magnum Connect program. Before I hand over to my colleague Sonia Junet, who developed this program and who will be your host today, I wanted to just do a quick bit of housekeeping. So please note, we'll not be using the raised hand function, but we do have the Q&A box. We have the chat open. Please do put your questions and comments for us in the chat. Please say hello and let us know where you're joining us from today. And I'm thrilled that we're going to tell you a little bit about our upcoming program, some of the workshops and opportunities that the entire team have been working on, and that we get to introduce you for the first time to our colleague, I think it's the first time, to our colleague Chris Peregrin, Global Partnerships Director, who is one of the best minds and hearts in photography today. So I can't wait to hear more from Chris about how he's working with photographers today, and I hope that will be useful for you all. So thank you all once again for your time, and with that I'll hand over to Sonia. Thank you, Sonia.
Thank you, Shannon. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining today for our first Magnum Connect program. It's so great to see everyone where you're signing in from the Magnum. So this is our first Magnum Connect program, which will be a regular event taking place quarterly. And the idea of the program is an opportunity to meet with everyone online, and for some of you that have done portfolio reviews or workshops with us before, to meet afterwards to kind of keep a connection. I think for me, if there is one thing that I take away from this past year of working online, is that it's been really fantastic to actually create a space to meet and deliver meaningful programs online and to connect in ways that we hadn't imagined possible before. So that's a little bit the idea of the Connect program. Before we listen to Chris' lecture, I'm just going to walk you through the current workshops and events you can attend with Magnum Learn in October. So starting with tomorrow, you have an open day with Matt Black and Susan Meslas to talk about the upcoming long-term mentorship program. You can still register for the open day. It is free to attend, and the event will be divided in two parts. There will be a discussion with Susan Meslas and Matt Black, followed by the showcase of students' work from the past long-term mentorship program. So if anyone is interested in Susan's and Matt's work and in this specific program, please do sign up for it. It will start at 6 p.m. London time. Then we have an online workshop in September with Emin Osman and Chloe Kerouas. It's going to be a 3-day workshop. This is the second time we're running this workshop. And the first time was in March, and it proved really helpful and insightful for everyone joining. So we decided to do it again. And so the same workshop is running twice. The first one is taking place from Friday 3rd till Sunday 5th September. And the second one from the 10th till the 12th of September. And this workshop is really about learning how to pitch your work, organizing your archive, applying for funding, and on the last day we do group reviews. Then we have our regular online portfolio reviews that are taking place again in September. The portfolio reviews format is they last 1 hour, and this is a one-on-one with the photographer you chose to meet. We We see the portfolio reviews as a great way to help photographers identify the next step from finding your photographic voice to the process of discovering and making a long-term project that you're passionate about. Then in September as well, and this is our first event in person since a very, very long time, we will be in Paris in the new Magnum office in Paris for the Magnum Learn in Paris weekend. So the weekend will be set as in the mornings you will hear lectures by Magnum photographers, and in the afternoon you will take part in group portfolio reviews. We will have lunch together and plenty of coffee breaks. And you can either join for the day or for the weekend. The Magnum photographers taking part are Christina de Middel, Sabia Chimin, Lorenzo Meloni, and Yael Martinez. We have two scholarships available for this workshop, which are open to photographers based in Paris or the wider region. You don't need to be French to apply, but you need to be based in Paris. Then the individual mentorship. It's a regular program that is ongoing throughout the year. You can choose a photographer from this list and over the course of 3 to 6 months, meet regularly to discuss your project. If you would like to meet with the Magnum photographer that is not listed here, please do let us know because we might be able to arrange something. And then finally, the last one for today is Picturing Place, an online workshop with Mark Power, which is kicking off on the 20th of October. It will be a 5-week workshop online, and you will be asked to make new work every week and meet weekly with Mark and your group. There is also a scholarship available for this workshop that is open to anyone, regardless of age and nationality. The successful candidate will be chosen based on the quality of their work. So this is for the workshop for September and October. There is a lot going on. And I can see that Chris has arrived. That's great. So without further ado, let me introduce you to our guest speaker, Chris Peregrin, who has kindly agreed to be with us today. Thank you so much. So Christopher Peregrin recently joined Magnum Photo as the agency's Global Director of Partnerships, heading up the teams responsible for Magnum's global assignments, commissions, and partnerships, leading on strategy as well as business development. Prior to joining the Magnum team, Christopher worked at the creative agency Learn & Partners, where he oversaw print and video production for global campaigns, including Tommy Hilfiger and Topshop. He started his career at Annie Leibovitz Studio, before holding senior roles at both US Harpers Bazaar and Ralph Lauren. Chris is going to be with us for the next 45 minutes. Please do enter your questions in the Q&A function, and we will keep them at the end. We'll keep time at the end of his talk for questions. The talk is being recorded, so we will make it available afterwards for a limited period of time, so you can always listen back, and you will also receive this presentation that I have just showed you. So let me stop share my screen and welcome Chris. Are you here? Yes.
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Great. Yes. Hi.
Oh, great. Hi, Sonia. And hello, everybody out there in Zoom land. It's good to see a kind of rowdy chat session going. Good morning from New York. I'm just going to get myself situated here. So I'm happy to be here. Thanks again for asking me, Sonia. I know this has been a kind of, there's ongoing programming, and I'm sure many of you who are here are aware of how sort of quickly and seamlessly Sonia and the team that she's a part of had to transition last year to this, as we all did, to this kind of digital ordeal. So I actually haven't been able to participate much in this programming, so I'm psyched to be here and talk and share with you and hear what you're thinking about and talk to you a little bit about what I'm up to. I think it makes sense it's interesting when Sonia reads my, I guess, that intro or that bio, it sounds like there was a real progression that made a lot of sense around a trajectory in and around photography. And there was no real forethought on my part. I grew up in New York City, thinking I was going to ride horses professionally and train horses. And, you know, one day I missed the train and the coffee spilled on the shirt and the butterfly flew by, and I wound up with this job as an assistant in Annie Leibovitz's studio here in New York. And Annie's setup is really diverse in that she has an ongoing body of editorial work that she's making all the time. There are commercial projects that are at some phase of production all the time. There is typically an exhibition that's moving around the world that's connected to a book that she's made or is making. There's some sort of private portrait commission in the background in some way. She's scheduled to do some, so a big life, but a very, very small team. So right out of the gate, I was sort of exposed to lots of different paths in and around photography, which was a fantastic experience. And it was right pre-Obama that she was, you know, that I was working with her. And so it was that part of her body of work. She was spending a lot of time with him on the campaign trail, and we were getting her in and out of, you know, access to him, which was super complicated. But it was a great training ground. And as Sonia mentioned, I then went from there to Ralph Lauren, which was a completely different machine, you know, a real kind of corporate, slow moving entity, where I was also producing a lot of much more still life photography for their home business. There's 4 or 5 lines and collections, so they're shooting all over the world. Totally different style, different usage for those pictures, different budgets, different kind of creative proposition, but also valuable to me to be sort of a, you know, small part of a much bigger team there. And out of Ralph, I wound up going to spend about a year as the photo director at Harpers Bazaar, which is a fashion magazine in the United States, commissioning assignments for that publication. Again, totally different than both Annie and Ralph. Like, no money to produce a lot of content all the time, editorial calendar, editorial cadence, much more broad range of kind of photographic needs. And then after Harper's Bazaar, I wound up at an advertising agency. So for the purposes of this conversation, having been exposed to working inside a photographer's studio, at a big brand, at a big editorial outlet, at a big advertising agency. So seeing lots of different ways in which photographers are commissioned, paid, asked to work, asked to collaborate, given free rein, versus working to a very specific brief, participating in projects that feel collaborative, and also participating in projects that feel sort of dictatorial and maybe not so rewarding or fulfilling, but challenging in their own way. So just a little bit about that, that's my background. And I can say that I came to Magnum, my initial conversations with Magnum were around really focusing exclusively on the commercial market, broadly conceived, in the United States. And in the course of my early conversations with them and sort of understanding the specifics around how Magnum is structured versus how many other photo agencies are structured, that there was this team globally that was working on corporate assignments, commercial projects for brands, institutions, corporations, et cetera. And then there was another team that was working exclusively on editorial projects, broadly conceived. And I think one of the things I was saying to Sonia before we got on this call was we really need to sort of define those terms, because editorial used to mean something, and its definition has changed, as has a kind of a commercial project. So those were very different silos in the Magnum organization, and there was not a lot of overlap between those teams partnering on the sort of validity or viability of certain editorial projects and how those might enhance a photographer's commercial portfolio. So in the conversations with Magnum initially, I said, well, I've never been an agent. And it sounds a little bit like it's an agent job, you know, looking for new business opportunities, that sort of thing. But I've worked with all of the agents, and I have a sense of what that role is. But it seems to me there's another bit of business we could do around consolidating or integrating the editorial team with the commercial team. And I'll talk a little bit about why. But again, for the purposes of this conversation, you know, editorial used to mean there's an editor at a publication, at a news outlet, at a media entity that has a story that they want to tell. And they put together a team, a journalist, a photojournalist, perhaps it's the same person, perhaps it's two different people, and they send those people out into the world to find and tell their story in collaboration with them. The editor becomes the sort of the creative there, or the collaborator, the person who's thinking about putting a shape to the story. There's no there's no corporate interest in that story. I will say that story is being paid for by the magazine or by the newspaper or by the media outlet. And so really the job is to, in an unencumbered way, go out into the world and tell a story about what you see. I mean, this is a gross oversimplification of what editorial means, but now the landscape of editorial has changed a lot. There are opportunities to do sponsored editorial projects, meaning that a brand, a tech company will pay for a story to be told. Their logo will live alongside the story on the digital platform of the brand, of the news organization, of the media outlet. The brand in no way will be featured in the story. It's a story, let's say, about climate change that a big tech company feels is an important story to tell. And one of that company's pillars of sustainability is talking about gender equity, access to water, carbon neutrality, you know, one of these issues. And so that brand wants to be associated with a story that's talking about one of those issues. So they will pay the news organization to put their logo alongside the story. So what does that mean? It oftentimes means there's a lot more money for the story, quite frankly. It's why the brands will do it. It's why the news organizations will do it. And oftentimes it's because there's no threading the brand into the story, it still feels like it's an editorial project. It is an editorial project, but the brand has visibility alongside the story. And this is, anybody who's spending any time reading their news online, this isn't an unfamiliar proposition. There's then branded content, branded editorial content, which is when a brand will pay for a story to be told around the mortgage crisis. And say a bank wants to, in an editorial context, deliver a message about their lending program. I'm sort of making this up on the fly, but the bank will go to a news outlet, a news organization, and say, we'd like to tell this story, this sort of universal story around the mortgage crisis. And we'd like to weave into that story how we, as a bank, have helped move the needle. So that becomes a branded piece where the brand will then feature heavily in the story. And again, probably not unfamiliar to most of you, this sort of format. So pure editorial, sponsored editorial, branded content, they're all doing it. The New York Times has got a creative studio now where they are working with brands to try to figure out how to organically weave stories about an organization into their journalism. I don't mean to call it the New York Times, they all have them. Everybody's got a kind of content studio. Condé Nast, they have their own internal advertising agency now that's working directly with brands to deliver message for those brands in the editorial context. So, so Magnum, and I'm just going to keep an eye on the clock here because I feel I could just wander off into some conversation about God knows what. But I do feel like, I mean, coming into this conversation, it was a little it felt to me best to just sort of from the outset, not really knowing who's listening, just make sure that we're defining our terms, because when we say editorial, it means a different thing to a lot of different people. And there are questions that need to be asked as a photographer about who's paying for this story and when you get a budget and it feels a little bit robust. In the fashion context, as you know, editorial means that you are assembling a group of creatives, a photographer, a stylist, a hairstylist, a makeup artist, a model, and giving them room to play. So if Gucci is an advertiser for Vogue, Gucci then gets featured in their editorial pages. So all of the pictures in the editorial section, in the sort of back, the sort of fashion story section of the magazine are featuring garments that are owned by the brands that are advertising for the magazine, right? So when a photographer has a great idea for a fashion story and they want us to pitch it to Vogue, and it has to do with, their kid wearing bubble wrap out on the, well, Vogue isn't going to be interested in it because bubble wrap isn't an advertiser. So these editorial stories that wind up getting told in a fashion context are all very closely tied to the brands that are paying for advertising space in those magazines. So again, if this is a little bit, a review for some of you, or a bit of an oversimplification of some of these terms, I thought it was important to just have the conversation. So another thing that in terms of understanding the difference between editorial, sponsored content, branded content, is usage. And I guess what I'm describing here, or what I'm talking about here, are some very sort of fundamental elements that are part of an assignment. So if you get an assignment for Vanity Fair, all assignments for Vanity Fair are not created equally. Some of them are pure editorial, some are sponsored content, some are branded content. So it becomes important from my perspective to understand that. And then also understand the usage of the pictures. And usage is one of those, the usage and the term are the two kind of basic bits of information any agent or any representative or any photographer really understands. So once you shoot the pictures and deliver them to Vanity Fair, how are the pictures going to be used? There's typically a term, 3 months, 6 months, a year, 5 years, depending on the scope of the project. It's an important thing for you to know. Is it being used digital only? Is it going into print? Is it going to be, is there some paid media behind it? Meaning, can your image wind up on a paid broadcast that's a commercial for the magazine? There's a whole other set of sort of pricing schedules that would go along with something like that. Are you giving them out of home usage? Meaning, can your picture wind up on a billboard, or can it wind up on a bus stop or a phone booth in New York? So questions around usage and the term become very important. And then can the pictures be used? I remember 3 or 4, 5 years ago, maybe a little longer now, the usage used to come to us and it would be like, oh, it's digital only. we're not using it in print. We're not using it out of home, because those used to be the major ways brands paid for messaging or for advertising. Gucci would pay $85,000 a month to get a page taken out in American Vogue, and that was their advertising spend. Well, now that's not so important. What's more important is their reach on digital, is their reach on social media, on TikTok, on Instagram. So this idea that the usage is digital only, as though that's less important, less expensive, we are in the moment where that's all being sort of turned upside down. So print actually becomes less important in 2021, than even print. So digital only. Well, what does digital mean? Does it mean you can use those pictures for paid media, that I can pay, fill in the celebrity to post that picture on our behalf? So all of those questions, really important. I feel like I'm providing a lot of questions and maybe not getting a lot of answers. So I do want to get to a part where we can dig in on some questions. So, okay, so for commercial work, lots of different ways commercial work, and I'm just going to assume that this is perhaps a group of photographers or people in the business that are thinking about commercial work or wanting to find out how to get commercial work, or how do you even begin? Or say I'm a documentary photographer or a photojournalist and I want to start shooting fashion or beauty or whatever. Well, the short answer is that yes, for sure, some brands will look at, or some companies or corporations will look at your style and what you do and your post-production process or lack thereof, and say, this feels like us. This feels like a Balenciaga picture. This feels like a Bank of America picture. And assign you to do a project that is, shooting factory workers in Detroit for us, and deliver exactly what you do. You go out into the world. They've not given you anything beyond, we want you to shoot the workers in situation, make them the heroes of the picture, perhaps give you a little bit more information, but really turn you loose and allow you to deliver pictures that then will be used commercially. Other times you will get a brief that says, gray backdrop, black t-shirt, glasses, smiling, in profile, so where you're delivering quite a technical picture. How are they determining whether or not you're capable of shooting those pictures? They look at your pictures. I mean, it's that simple. They look at your portfolio, they look at your Instagram. I mean, social media, as I was on the phone with a Magnum photographer who shall remain nameless at the end of last week, who's got a fairly big Instagram following, by which I mean in the sort of low 100,000s, and a very high engagement. So he posts a picture and 10,000 people like it. And he posts a picture once every 3 weeks or something. And he thinks Instagram is grotesque, and he thinks it's, and all of the critiques, all of the very legitimate critiques of Instagram and photography are valid, and I respect. He recently lost a job to a photographer who had an Instagram following that was sort of double his. And that's what they're looking for. Again, looking for reach. With those media buys, we can take the page out in the magazine, or we can go to a photographer who's got this incredible reach and this incredible engagement. So brands are looking at not only your sort of following and your engagement, but that's also their first stop on a portfolio hunt, to see the kind of pictures you take and just kind of who you are and what you care about, and do your sort of values align with the brand. But the biggest thing I would suggest, if you're thinking about working commercially, wanting to work commercially, maybe don't have a portfolio that you think, or don't have a body of work that kind of you feel like you can send to an ad agency or to a brand direct, or you don't have an agent that can't make those connections for you. I think trying to find gigs assisting photographers that are shooting the kind of work that you want to shoot is is the way to do it. And how do you do that? You find the photographer that you're interested in, you find their agent, and you call their agent and say, I'm a working photographer. I'd love to be on set with so-and-so and help do light. Make yourself available to be either a photo assistant. If you're, there's a lot of photographers that are very, very successful that don't know how to focus their camera and that can use that kind of support on set. If you've never lit a studio, if you shoot out in the world and you're a purely documentary photographer, photojournalist, working with available light, totally valid and beautiful. But if the job requires you to go into a studio and have key light and fix shadow and throw shadow on somebody, and you don't know how to do that, you're not going to be considered for the job. So there are technical skills. There's a technical approach to working in a studio that you can certainly figure out your own language, vocabulary, rhythm, preferences, likes, dislikes, but being on set with a working commercial photographer that's got their team in place, and you come in as the second and third assistant and just do a fly on the wall kind of couple of days, watching what they do and how they set light and watching what it looks like on the monitor. To me, that seems always like the most valuable way of sort of understanding what it means to work in a studio, and vice versa. If you're a studio photographer and work really in a kind of technical way in the studio, but don't shoot on location, and the brief calls for a photographer to be on location, find photographers that are doing beautiful work on location with available light or natural light, or they're working with minimal cards and somebody's just helping them bounce that light around onto the talent, onto the dress. Go be with them for a couple of days or a couple of jobs. Figure out what that looks like, what the process is. Also, just understanding what it's like to be on set. Who's who on set? Who's the client? Who's the creative director? Who's the digital tech? What's that whole ecosystem looking like? How's the photographer collaborating with the rest of that team? What questions are being asked of the photographer in the moment? What is not being asked of the photographer? I think if you want to be working commercially, exposing yourself to commercial sets however you can, either as a production assistant, but more to the point, as a photography assistant or a lighting assistant. If you've got an Instagram and you've got a portfolio, agents love to get those phone calls. Agents are always looking for good photo assistants and support for their photographers. Okay, so a little bit aware that we're working against the clock here. So
yes, I would say like 10 more minutes and then we move to questions.
10 more minutes. Okay.
Yeah,
I have a little bit of a cheat sheet here. As you can maybe tell, I wasn't super. Oh, the other thing I thought we might do was another big thing to touch on, which I'll just touch on briefly, but is video and the idea of motion and what it means to shoot stills. Most commercial briefs that we get now or commercial projects have got a video component to them. Either, you're doing a sort of 15-second thing for social media, or there's like a 3-minute long anthem campaign kind of really short form video asset. So a lot of photographers at Magnum specifically, their practice is very is stills focused. Some of them are playing with video and are of course willing to do it, and in their kind of personal practices are incorporating motion. It's a very different thing to position yourself as capable of operating a video camera than it is to position yourself as a director. Directors are expected to come up with fairly elaborate storyboards, treatments for how they're going to approach something. Oftentimes a sizzle reel that's 30 to 45 seconds. That serves as an inspiration for the campaign that you're trying to do. So yes, as projects come to you and you're interested in shooting video, important that you understand that what you're saying when you can direct. Yeah, sure, I can shoot stills and I can direct. The expectations of a director are a little bit different than that of just a stills photographer. Oftentimes, photographers that are trying to direct will get a very strong DP. a director of photography, someone who's carrying the camera, who's technically capable of delivering what the photographer is articulating in sort of layman's terms. And the DP can take that, process it, and then capture on the photographer's behalf. It's the same way Steven Spielberg works. I mean, Steven Spielberg's not actually, well, maybe Steven actually does probably hold the camera, but most directors will just sort of brief the DP, say, here's what we're going for, and then the DP will execute. And then the director will sit in the edit room with an editor, you know, sort of scrubbing the footage and making sure. But just a dotted line, because rarely now are projects, especially commercial projects, stills only. There's typically a big motion component. So if you're not interested in motion as part of your practice, but are interested in maybe becoming a director or thinking about being a director or just having another set where you're sort of telling people what to do, the team that you want around you is a really good, first of all, a really good DP. And by really good, I mean someone who's not just following your orders or direction, but also has their own perspective on what the shot can look like, because then they can help protect you a little bit, and they can help function as, you know, think a little bit like a director. Oftentimes DPs are on their way to becoming directors. Anyway, so there's rosters of DPs that are shooting commercial motion stuff that you can sift through. Sonia, what have I not touched on that we should maybe?
I was thinking maybe how about talking about a bit about working for free, you know, what we discussed when
working for free, yeah.
Or
so,
covering expenses, or like.
Yeah, so this typically comes up, the working for free question comes up mostly in the editorial context, right? Like if a magazine, I mean, I'm thinking specifically about fashion magazines, but oftentimes, you know, a fashion magazine will have an editorial story that they need to tell. So they need to fill 8 pages at the back with a story. And they have $1,000 for the story that they can pay out of pocket, which, you know, is enough to buy everybody on set coffee and cover taxis for the crew or something. So your photographer expenses, you know, you'd have equipment expenses, you'd have to maybe rent some equipment, you'd have to rent lighting equipment, you'd have to maybe rent a camera if you're shooting film, but the deadlines are such that you have to shoot digital. And if you don't have a digital camera, you're gonna have to shoot digital. You're gonna need a photo assistant. So very quickly, the $1,000 disappears. Oftentimes, the assignment will come in and the photographer will say, well, what's the budget? And the budget is minuscule, and they don't wanna do it because they've thought as far as the budget. To me, the most important factors on an editorial project are, especially in the kind of fashion space, which then leads to commercial work, is, well, who else is a part of the team? So the editor at the magazine will say, well, the stylist is so-and-so. So if they tell me that the stylist is somebody who I happen to know is also styling all of the campaigns for Saint Laurent and for Gucci and for Hugo Boss and doing these big commercial projects where the budgets are $500,000, then this becomes, the editorial project becomes an opportunity for the photographer to establish the relationship with that stylist. Or Alex Webb, who's a Magnum photographer, was recently asked to shoot Bella Hadid for American Vogue with Tawny Goodman. So Tawny Goodman is a stylist who was the fashion director at American Vogue for 25 years. She's a kind of giant in the business, in the styling. She, as a stylist, respected around the world. Bella Hadid obviously is a you know, fairly top model who has big corporate clients like Michael Kors. She's the face of Michael Kors. So Alex Webb, who's maybe not particularly interested in Bella Hadid or in American Vogue, is certainly interested in shooting for Michael Kors someday. So this editorial project becomes an opportunity for Alex and Tawny to develop a rapport, for Alex to take pictures of Bella. And if Bella likes the pictures, Bella Hadid often, I don't mean to single her out, but often the models wind up having say in these big commercial jobs about what photographers they like, who they feel safe with, who they feel takes a good picture of them, who they just kind of jive with. So those details become very important on an editorial project. And what's the magazine? Is it a magazine that we feel, respects photographers, doesn't do weird things in post-production with their pictures? Alex is a sort of master colorist. So do we trust that when we deliver the files, they're not going to change them? They're not going to do some weird kind of post-production, or they're not going to print it on cheap paper, so you're going to lose the color anyway. So certainly the publication becomes important, but really the team and what is the story. And also Alex Webb, who wants to be or is available to be shooting more fashion stuff, well, he's not looking at the fashion in the picture. And we have Tani Goodman on set, so we know that the clothes are going to look incredible because Tani's there looking after the clothes. The hair and makeup are going to look incredible because there's a top team that's looking after that. And then those pictures wind up in Tani's portfolio. They wind up maybe in Bella's portfolio. They wind up in the hairstylist's portfolio and in the makeup artist's portfolio. So you wind up, when the hairstylist is pitching themselves to creative directors, and there's this incredible picture of Bella. Oh, who shot that picture? Alex Webb. So the picture winds up having a life beyond the publication. The relationships that are formed on those editorial sets are the ones that wind up having real commercial viability. So that's not to say, we all have to feed ourselves, and you can't be working for free all the time, but a lot of those editorial jobs wind up being real investments. I hope that makes sense in the way I'm framing it. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's really insightful. And maybe we can start taking questions. And there's one that is kind of good following what you just said. Pedro is asking, is it at all common that brands partner with artists on the long term?
Yeah, I mean, for sure, there's no sort of, clear or simple answer, but there are certainly brands where if there's a creative designer who's really running the show, Alexander McQueen, for example, big fashion house, lots of money. Alexander McQueen works with lots of different kinds of photographers. They are interested they're very collaborative and respectful of artists, multimedia artists. They're interested in, obviously, I mean, there's always a fashion element to what they do, but they don't do the same campaign every year. There are some brands, this is our photographer, this is our stylist, this is who we work with. Those kind of big mass brands. I mean, I worked on Tommy Hilfiger for many years, and there's a crew, and it's a little bit, the talent changes, the kind of concept will change depending on who the girl is or who the model is, but there's a real formula, maybe not the right word, but there's a real sort of preferred team. That's not to say that you can't get into those brands and shoot maybe smaller projects for them, stuff that's only digital, that's only social media, that's for lookbooks, that's for internal use only. But I think sort of J.W. Anderson, I think some of the smaller companies with younger designers who are interested in moving away from the completely overly referenced fashion photography space that are interested in, that are totally available to doing something that's maybe more disruptive. My suggestion always around this thing is like, what do you like? I mean, if you like the brand, if you like the designer, if you like what they're doing, then show your work to them. Reach out to the art directors, creative directors. Yeah.
Nice. Which is like, let me follow up with a question from our own Amber at Magnum, and she's asking, could you talk about the most effective way a photographer should pitch a story idea to a corporate client?
I think the most effective, well, there's this sort of logistics part of that question, I think, which is like, who do I contact at the brand? But then there's also the concept. And I think the thing to remember in terms of corporate clients are, what do they care about? How in your idea of what the story is, are you centering the brand? Because at the end of the day, their budgets go towards stories, campaigns, messages that really push their identity, right? So it's either a story that in some way has got some, and I'm going to just I sort of had an eye on another question, which was about Magnum moving, that Magnum is doing more commercial work recently. And I think one of the things about this moment that we're in, or just the way of the world more generally, is that there are opportunities for, Apple to talk about climate, or Nike to talk about gender equity, or diversity broadly, whatever that means. So is that a corporate job? Absolutely. Are the budgets that are coming from those brands more robust than what are coming from editorial outlets? Absolutely. But there's stories maybe and campaigns that have got some depth and some weight, which to me, in a Magnum context, everybody's talking about sustainability, broadly conceived. What does sustainable practice mean in your supply chain, your external partners? What does it mean in your value chain internally as a company? How are you talking about moving the needle and becoming more efficient in your, carbon spends, that sort of thing? Those kinds of projects, yes, they're corporate, but that feels like a natural fit for a kind of a Magnum kind of a project. And then in terms of how if you've got an idea for Tommy Hilfiger that's about the Great American Road Trip, and you're gonna, whatever, Tommy is this kind of Americana brand, and you've got something that feels like Tommy, whatever that means to you, this sort of modern take on Route 66 with a very cool group of groovy kids from the Bronx and East London and whatever. You want to put them on and you're going to center the clothes. Well, you reach out to, it used to be that big advertising agencies held those scopes of work for the brand, and now oftentimes the brands are hiring people directly. So it's hard to find the right person. It's typically a photo producer, a creative director. I mean, if you're savvy online and you can figure out who those people are, LinkedIn is great, Instagram is great. Figure out who the stylists that are already working with the brand are and send them the idea. If it's direct to the brand, it's probably somebody on the marketing team. It's not the chief marketing officer because they're looking at the whole thing, but art buyers, art producers, photo producers, those are the people internally that are looking at projects and commissioning projects or presenting projects to their creative teams and figuring out, does this kind of ladder up to what it is that we want to be talking about this year or this season? That's helpful.
Nice one, thanks. So there's a few questions about branded content or sponsored content. So do the corporate client have a say in determining the story of the direction of the story, and how do you keep control of basically what's coming out? How do you avoid making fake news? That was one of the terms that was used on one of the
it's a really good question, and it's one that you have to trust the editor that you're working with. You have to trust that you're doing it with a reputable media outlet, and if you have an agent involved in the conversation, can make sure that you have final approval on what gets published, or you have what they call meaningful consultation, so that even if it's not your, if you don't have the final say, final approval, it means that any edits that are made along the way, you are consulted on. I will say that I see how one's mind could take this in all kinds of directions. I will say that with these kind of branded content stories, there are lawyers involved at the brand and at the media entity, and they are vetted by those lawyers, and there is all sorts of checks and balances to make sure that what is being delivered is factually accurate, that there's an angle to the story, but that it's not simply manufactured. I mean, the same kind of journalistic integrity needs to be applied. in terms of delivering and reporting on facts. But it's the team, really. It's that there's an agent involved, hopefully, that there's an editor that you trust, that you've collaborated with, and that there is the spirit of collaboration and cooperation, and that what you've delivered, that you are consulted on in the production and the post-production process.
Yes, thank you.
But it's complicated. It's complicated.
Yeah, I
It's
can imagine.
Yeah. Complicated because you're not going out and telling the story that you want to tell. You're telling the story that the brand needs told, which is oftentimes a true story. There's oftentimes other elements that wind up not getting told in the story. Yeah, it's complicated. It's not quite an ad, but it's not pure editorial. It's really gray.
One last question, maybe from Adil, and which is about building the portfolio. And he says, what's the best way to tell or share a story? Should we involve more personality or personal conversations when building our portfolio of work? Should the portfolio be more like personal work, or should it be more commercial?
So I think it should be whatever work you feel most strongly about. I think the portfolio is the opportunity for you to show, if you're wanting to work commercially, diversity, by which I mean you can shoot on location with available light. You can shoot in a studio with sort of a technical setup. You can shoot individuals, groups of people that are sort of posed, being directed, or in motion. Your post-production process, your retouching, I think, if you're doing any retouching, that you feel is really good and strong. If you're wanting to shoot beauty, for example, by which I mean makeup, you're going to Revlon or to Maybelline, and a lot of those pictures that you'll see wind up being very tight crops of a face that the skin looks real. I mean, I don't need, I'm not a photographer and I'm not a retoucher, but I can tell, I know that retouching skin is super, super complicated, and it's very easy to make it look like a painting or dishonest. And if you're going to a beauty brand, that you're really making sure that the retouch is clean and inviting, but also not dishonest, and not removing the humanity from the skin or from the face. So thinking about those, thinking how is the brand going to look at, or how is the company for their purposes going to see themselves and see our story in trusted hands with this person. If you're shooting fashion and you're showing wrinkles on your shirt, are they going to think you've overlooked those kinds of details? So diversity for sure, by which I mean, interior, exterior, landscape stuff, tight portraits, that you have that body. But I think the personal work is super important, who you are and what you care about. More and more, that matters. Teams that, brands are investing or willing to invest in photographers and storytellers that care about something. That's not to say that if your project is to shoot the global H&M campaign, that your portfolio is a bunch of models in a studio against white seamless, that's not valid. But I think your story and the teams that are being hired, and what you care about and what you see when you go out into the world is actually important, because the first stop at a brand is with a creative director. And creative directors are often creative people. And there's other forces internally that aren't maybe creative at a brand. There's production people, and there's account people, and there's, brand identity people. But the creative director is the person who's often the dreamer, and the person who cares about things outside of their mandate. So I think, trust your instincts, show the work that you're proud of, but also make sure that you're showing some diversity. We have a photographer, Khalik Allah, who's new in the Magnum roster this year, and Khalik shoots a lot. I mean, most of his work is at night outside with available light from either bodegas or grocery stores or traffic signs, and the pictures are beautiful. But that's his portfolio. So he's now done a project for a brand that he wanted to shoot outside, but I said, well, why don't we go into a music studio and shoot this person inside, and we'll send you with a photo assistant who can help you light that person, because I think first of all the pictures will look great, but second of all they'll be great for your portfolio. I know you can take that picture at night on the corner under the street light, but can you go inside with a photo director or a light director and take a picture with you know, on a lit set? Those pictures, from my perspective as someone who's trying to position Khalik for other work, are super important, that he has those pictures too, the inside pictures. Hope that answers the question.
Yes, we have a comment that says Khalik Allah is a legend.
He's a legend.
Chris, we have to stop here.
No, okay.
I'm so sorry. That was really short,
pleasure.
but that was also really good and intense. I liked it. I liked it. So thank you so much for being with us from New York.
My pleasure.
And for taking the time this morning. It was really great.
Thanks for having me. And sorry I couldn't get to all the questions, but yeah, look at Khalik, look at his time video, keep an eye out. He's got some very cool stuff coming up. And also he's a nice guy. And I just want to say that too, that detail, the sort of diva photographer, creative collaborator that's expecting people to kowtow to them. It's an old idea. It doesn't work. It's not a good look. Brands aren't interested. They're really interested in, you know, who do you want to sit next to on a plane if you have to shoot, go fly somewhere to shoot a commercial assignment somewhere. So Khalik is like the total package there. He takes a very cool picture, but he's also a really nice guy. So that thing, please and thank you. After you wrap a job, send an email to everybody, just everybody that's been copied thus far on the project, is just say, thank you, this was super fun, can't wait to do it again. That kind of stuff goes a really long way. And I've also watched it on the photographer end, where those emails don't come in and the photographers are like, what the hell, we just delivered this cool, you know. So that kind of stuff is also really helpful, just the kind of humanity of it. Doesn't matter how cool your picture is. If you're a nightmare, people don't want to work with you. And if you're not willing to collaborate, and if your attitude is, this is how I do it, this is how I always do it, this is who I am, all that stuff, that inflexibility, it doesn't fly, in my opinion. Okay.
Yeah, it's a very good way to wrap it. Thank you for that. Thanks a lot.
Of course, my pleasure.
And thank you everyone who came and joined. There were a lot of you actually today, which is really nice. And so moving on to the next stage for some of you. We're going to do group portfolio reviews now, so please do connect to the next Zoom link. And thank you everyone again for joining and being with us. Thank you. Thank you, Chris.
Bye-bye, my pleasure.
Bye.